Welcome everyone, Costin here on Zeros Gaming with the video to discuss the subject matter of the European Union Copyright Directive. Again, updates on the subject of what the European Union is trying to do, which is provide an update to copyright across the European Union, which doesn't seem bad on the surface, and indeed there are changes that are welcome. The problem is there are also plenty of changes, fairly significant ones, that would be extremely harmful, in particular to the internet as we know it. And these are Article 11 and Article 13. There is an update as to what's been going on. Right now, there are attempts and negotiations on a European level, so European Commission, Council, European Parliament. They all have to agree on a version, pass it, and then it goes to individual European Union members to also pass legislation. This might not work out so well, even if they do pass it on a European level, because there are countries opposed to this, countries that have no problem telling Brussels they can shove it, as it were, and that might create a political crisis on a European Union level if it does pass. But if we get to that point, things are pretty bleak as they were, because by that point you will have a very significant negative impact as a result of this copyright directive. So what's been going on recently? From Digital Music News, and by the way, if Article 11 and 13 pass, I would not be able to read from an article like I am right here, but anyway. Several weeks ago, the Copyright Directive, most importantly Article 13, appeared to hit a fatal brick wall. Thanks in part to Google's intensive lobbying efforts, multiple European Union member states disagreed to the final version of the bill. With Italy, Poland, Sweden, Croatia, Luxembourg, Portugal now opposing the Copyright Directive, Julia Reda, a staunch opponent of the bill, urged her supporters to call on countries to ensure Article 13's defeat. Lawmakers had also cancelled the scheduled approval meeting for the Copyright Directive. The proposed law had come to an abrupt halt. Now two countries may have just saved the bill, along with Article 11 and Article 13. France and Germany to the rescue. France and Germany have reached a new deal. Under the compromise, the Copyright Directive, specifically Article 13, would apply to all European for-profit platforms. All online platforms would have to install upload filters, continuously checking for copyright infringement, except under three of the following criteria. Platform and site available to the public for less than 3 years, annual turnover falls below 10 million euros, and fewer than 5 million unique monthly visitors. Article 13 would apply to all apps and websites in the European Union. Outlining several examples, Rita explained upload filters required would include discussion boards, Patreon, niche social networks, and small European competitors to larger US brands, like a Polish news sharing platform similar to Reddit. According to Rita, if passed, even smaller and newer platforms may fall under the upload filter requirement. They would allegedly have to prove they've undertaken best efforts to obtain licenses from rights holders. These includes major labels, book publishers, and stock photo databases, among others. Criticizing France and Germany's compromises, she added, in practice, all sites and apps where users may share content will likely be forced to accept any license a rights holder offers them, no matter how bad terms, no matter whether they actually want that right holder's copyrighted material to be available on their platform, to avoid the massive legal risk of coming in conflict with Article 13. Final discussions will take place between European Union member states this Friday. If talks move forward, they would discuss and agree to a final text on Tuesday, February 12th. And that is ongoing, and they haven't quite reached a deal yet. They may or may not. That these things are hard to say. When this thing first came out, it looked pretty bleak because there was a significant organized push behind it, with many interest groups backing this, and there was very little actual opposition except on the fringes, shall we say. Opposition has mounted, and I can tell you this: if this thing actually passes, the outcome will be so negative that the opposition will vastly increase. But you don't want to see what happens if it passes. I'll explain exactly why. See, the way the internet works, and this is in relation with Article 13. Article 11 mostly affects news aggregators. It's bad, mind you, that what they are trying to do. But Article 13 is devastating to the internet as we know it. To explain why. Currently, the internet in Europe, in America, mostly across the world, works under the principle of a safe harbor provision. And that idea, the idea of safe harbor, is the notion that you, as a website, if you have a website, you are not legally responsible for what people upload, assuming you take down copyright infringement material if you're asked to. So say if someone uploads a movie to YouTube, YouTube takes it down if it's asked to. That's the kind of situation. But YouTube is not held responsible for that upload happening in the first place. Let's be very clear. And this applies to things like music, sound, photos. Yes, plenty of sounds, actually. There's copyrighted sound materials, in video games in particular, music, etc. So a lot of content that gets posted on the internet would be infringing copyright. Now, there is plenty of piracy and all that, but there is a lot of harmless stuff. So say, for instance, someone takes a picture or, a screenshot basically from a film, right? Uses that as a forum avatar or posts that on a forum. Now that's technically infringing on copyright, but no one cares, right? So nothing happens yet. The site doesn't suffer. Maybe the user might have his picture taken out if someone does care enough, or maybe banned from that particular website. But that particular user, if an individual user keeps infringing, that person may be taken to court. Certainly that is how it goes. So individuals are held accountable, but not the websites. Under the proposed terms of Article 13, not only would websites be accountable, they would have to get a license in order for that content to actually be allowed to be uploaded in the first place. Or else, they're breaking the law. What's the problem? Well, I think you can understand the practical impact of this. So this is basically where upload filters come in. And we've had this on YouTube for a while. It's called Content ID. It's everything that you upload to YouTube is verified against the database. But even when you're looking at YouTube, YouTube is video, YouTube is music. What YouTube doesn't do right now, as far as I know, is photos, thumbnails, right? The thumbnails on videos, those don't get. Well, those two would fall under that, and that's probably the biggest impact that would happen on YouTube. But, even that, I guess, could be manageable. I'm not saying it would be nice, because we would have probably a lot more cases of content ID matchups. It would get pretty nasty for a lot of YouTubers. It would not be pretty, and you might even have a situation where even for music video, all that, things get a lot worse for YouTubers. But that's YouTube. We're not just talking about YouTube or Facebook or Twitter. We're talking every single website on the internet that is worth anything, a forum that you might frequent, it would be affected by that. What's the practical impact? What would happen if they pass this? What would realistically be? I think Julia Reda, who is very much opposed to this, I think she's actually an optimist, quite optimistic when she talks about the income. No, websites will not just impose upload filters. Yes, some would. That's an option. Some would impose upload filters and get licenses. Some would just block access to people in Europe, especially, when you're talking about websites outside of Europe. American websites, for instance, North American websites, a lot of them, as we've seen already with the data protection legislation that was passed, a lot of them chose to basically block access to users in the European Union because they didn't want to deal with our legislation. That would increase tenfold. Or third option is European users don't have websites with thumbnails, with photos, don't have websites where we can use any of that. So they will look like a desert in comparison to what people in the United States would have access to in comparison. Those are the outcomes. Those are the possibilities, but that's not to say that it's going to be one of these three. It's probably most likely for a lot of websites is going to be a combination. Some upload filters from some material, some content being taken down for European users, and maybe just some parts of a website completely inaccessible to European users. Or websites in general inaccessible to European users. That is the outcome of this legislation. That's why it's so devastating for the internet as we know it. I'm not doing this because it would affect my bottom line. If I'm being quite honest about how things would shake up for YouTube, I don't think YouTube, which already has a system of content ID in place, would be that badly affected. I think the internet as we know it, the internet that has done great things, I'd say, for humanity, allowed greater communication across countries, allowed people to get to know each other across borders, you know, across ethnicities, cultures, etc. That internet is basically they're basically gonna take a sledgehammer to it. And this is Europe, the so-called democracies of the world. Well, the democracies of the world that, in response to the quote-unquote establishment failing the European Union in a political crisis for years now, have basically moved more and more towards censorship across the board. And this is just part of it. You know, this is also a form of censorship. It affects media organizations, though many of the big media organizations support this legislation because they think it would benefit them against news aggregators, but it would certainly affect many smaller media organizations in a significant way. Or rather, I should say with media organizations, not that they support it, it's that the companies that own those media organizations support this legislation. The big media conglomerates support this legislation. So we'll see what happens. But as I see it, as someone who has been using the internet for quite a few years now, I can only see a devastating impact if this actually passes. For the internet as we know it, for freedom of speech, for hell, the economy, for the spreading of information for people, for a significant sector of the European economy, the digital sector, which would be pretty badly shaken up by this. The moment the internet becomes partitioned between countries, so this is the European internet, this is the American internet, is the moment the internet, the global internet as we know it, is dead, effectively. And it seems we're moving in that direction. In fact, this was warned years ago by some of the people that made the internet that this could happen. Well, it does seem that this is where we are going. Or at least this is where some people, or many people, organized interest groups, are trying to take us. I don't know what will happen. I can say, though, that for people in the European Parliament, if the elected officials vote for this, many of them can forget keeping their seats. Just putting that mildly, it would be a bloodbath. European parliamentary elections are this year, so you can expect things to not go very nicely for a lot of them. I think this is actually part of the reason why they're trying to push it now, because they know that the European parliamentary elections are not going to be good for them. Regardless, what they do with it. So they're trying to do this, the last moment, but they're just going to make it worse for them. And is it worth it? I don't think it is. Costin here on Serious Gaming signing out. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for more. And if you do like my content, please do consider supporting me by Patreon, PayPal. For as long as I'm able to do this, I don't know. Honestly, like, Patreon would be affected. Maybe Patreon stops servicing European Union members. We'll see. We will see.